his German counterpart for a, quote, sustainable ceasefire.
This comes after former Defence Secretary Ben Wallace warns that Israel's tactics will fuel the conflict for another 50 years.
Our reporter Charlie Peters joins us now for the latest on this developing story. Charlie, has the Western mood on the conflict shifted? I know you spent some time there in recent months. You did a sterling job as well. Compared to your reporting from then, do you feel a shift in the vibe coming from Israel, Gaza?
Well, from some countries, certainly, and just in the last moments, we heard from Prime Minister Rishi Sunak echoing that call for a sustainable ceasefire, the same language used by Lord Cameron, the Foreign Secretary, over the weekend, along with his German counterpart. We also heard from the French Foreign Minister calling for an immediate and durable truce. And of course, as you've just mentioned, the former Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, going much further, as is the privilege of former ministers, to speak very sternly on what he described as Israel's actions being a recruitment sergeant for Islamist organisations around the world and, of course, for Hamas in Gaza. He said that the Israeli Prime Minister was losing sight of the long term and conducting a killing rage with their current strategy in Gaza. Now, obviously, Mr Wallace's comments don't reflect the position of the British government anymore, but Rishi Sunak's statement this morning saying that too many lives have been lost also comes after the Deputy PM Oliver Dowden urged Israel to act with restraint. And I would say when I was in Tel Aviv, of all the world leaders to offer support for Israel, Mr Sunak was one of the strongest. He quite literally put his arm around Benjamin Netanyahu and said, we are with you in this conflict. Whereas Washington, Israel's most significant supporter, urged a more cautious message. Back in October, very soon after the country was still reeling from the October 7th terror attacks, President Joe Biden actually urged Israel to remember what happened in the United States after 9/11, when Biden said mistakes had been made, that Washington and America acted with too much aggression in its response to those terror attacks. And so Washington has always urged some degree of caution and restraint in the military operation in Gaza. It still supports Israel's strategy to destroy Hamas, both in terms of its leadership and its wider military infrastructure. But it is urging a change in strategy. However, I'd say I don't think that's particularly likely in the coming weeks and months. We have heard from security experts who spoke to GB News this morning saying that a strategy shift in a significant way is unlikely because, generally speaking, it is working. Their ambition to destroy Hamas and also free some of the hostages has so far continued on the track that Israel generally wants it to occur. However, just one hostage freed from military operations. So far, the 100 plus who were received last month were achieved through that short truce. So will there be a shift in the strategy from Israel? Probably not, but there could be smaller adjustments to their military goals. This week, we know that the Defence Secretary of the United States, Lloyd Austin, will be meeting with his Israeli counterpart, Yoav Gallant, in Tel Aviv. It's likely that the American move there is going to be to urge the Israelis to rely less on bombing campaigns and actually shift to sort of smaller, more elite military operations using smaller teams, fewer munitions. And we'll see if that strategy comes through.
Charlie, great stuff. Thank you so much. Joining us now is Tal Hinrichs, the spokesperson for the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Thank you for joining us. What has the Israeli response and the government response been from this growing pressure, it seems, of talk of a ceasefire? Can you just explain the Israeli position?
Thank you, Ben and Emily, for having me on today. Well, you see, of course, there is pressure on Israel. We're aware of that. But we're not fighting this war for likes on social media. We take advice from partners, of course, or for, we're not fighting this for better handshakes at the UN corridors. Yes, there is pressure, but we are fighting an existential genocidal threat called Hamas. So we will do whatever it takes to eliminate this terrorist regime in control of the Gaza Strip. This is the goal that we have defined for the operation, and it's a very, very legitimate military goal that we will achieve. You see, these calls for a ceasefire, a sustainable one. What is a sustainable ceasefire? One that would leave Hamas in power with the desire and military capabilities to perpetrate the October 7th massacre again and again and again. I don't think that's a sustainable reality. It's not an acceptable one that the Israeli nation, that the Israeli public would agree to live next to. Not anymore.
Tal, what would you say to our Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, when he's clearly fearful that Israel's response risks radicalising future generations in Gaza and could potentially prolong the war? There's a very real concern, and it's not based on taking sides, it's based on security concerns, that with the continued bombardment of Gaza, what will happen is that residents of Gaza will be more and more radicalised against Israel and also the West in general. What would you say to that?
I would refer him to historical lessons from the Second World War. You know, when the German Chancellor was here, he compared Hamas to the Nazis when he saw the atrocities of the October 7th massacre. And as you know, after the Second World War, the German population did not become more radical. In fact, they blamed the Nazis for what happened to their country, what happened to the world as consequence of this regime. So, and by the way, we're also starting to hear in certain parts of Gaza, some Palestinian people speaking out publicly against Hamas, which is something that, of course, we could not have heard before the Israeli military campaign to root out these terrorists. Now, one more thing to remember here is that Israel must send, and not only Israel, the civilized world as a whole, must send an unequivocal message against terrorism, because terrorists and bad actors around the world are watching what's happening in our region right now. They're taking notes. And if we show leniency, if you know, Hamas somehow remains in power, what kind of message does it send? It's an open invitation for more trouble and more bloodshed on behalf of other bad actors. So we must, as the civilized world, send this very strong message against terrorism, that terrorism is a dead end. Now, there was a word that he said that is simply not in place. He used the word rage. You see, Israel is not driven by rage, not at all. That's an unfortunate language. We are driven, we are seeking accountability. This is why the IDF is operating right now. We are not driven by rage.
I completely understand the goal of dismantling Hamas, but are you concerned by the number of civilian lives that are being lost? Because that's what seems to be motivating Western leaders to take this sort of new approach, calling for a ceasefire, is the concern that the level of destruction in Gaza is simply unsustainable and that too many civilian lives are being lost.
Once Hamas is eliminated, we said we don't want to see any kind of resurgence of terrorism in Gaza. But first, to build a better hope for this future, you know, you're talking about the destruction in Gaza as a result of Hamas's war that they waged on us with the attack on October 7th. You see, nothing new can be built there as long as these terrorists are in control of the Gaza Strip. Something significant has to change. Hamas must be eliminated. The radical ideology of Hamas and its grip on the Palestinian population also has to change for us to be able to build something better in this region. First, the right conditions have to be in place. You see, there's no point, so to say, let me compare it again, once again, to Europe, to talk about a Marshall Plan, for example, if we're still in 1939. First, you know, there's D-Day, there's the Stalingrad battle, and so on.
Tal,
things have to happen in order.
If I may just be very blunt, is there a limit to the amount of civilian casualties Israel is prepared to accept?
We don't accept one civilian casualty. We don't.
But there's 18,000 plus so far, according to Hamas.
We target terrorists and terror infrastructure. The IDF is doing the utmost effort to safeguard the civilian population in Gaza. Full stop. When we go to unprecedented extents to try to safeguard the civilians there and to ease the civilian suffering in Gaza, by the way. You know, the IDF, I'm sure that you've seen this map of the zones, the numbered zones. We, in fact, tell the civilians in Gaza exactly where and exactly when our troops are going to operate. What kind of military does that? What kind of Western military has ever done that? Of course, this puts our soldiers at risk because the terrorists also know where we're going to operate, but we are calling on them to evacuate. And I'm sure that friends and family of service members in the UK, they're watching us right now. They're wondering, well, who does that? It's us, the most moral military in the world.
Well, thank you very much for your time. Tal Hinrichs, spokesperson for the Israeli Prime Minister. Appreciate your time. Thank you very much.